Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice is much more than a game featuring a character suffering from psychosis. The psychosis isn't just part of Senua's backstory, a character trait, or a gimmick. Hellblade is all about psychosis. It's evident in the story, Senua's characterization, the graphics, the combat, the puzzle solving, and even the sound design. Hellblade doesn't include mental health issues for shock value, unlike a certain overhyped 2017 release I could mention. I expect the emphasis on a severe mental health condition puts off as many people as it attracts. People suffering with mental health issues may not want to put themselves through what could be a traumatic experience in their free time, while people who have a clean bill of mental health, God only knows how in 2018, might assume Hellblade isn't for them and skip it altogether. Regardless of where you stand on the mental health spectrum, I recommend you give Hellblade a try. A playthrough will last you between 6 and 8 hours, and the game is often available for $20 on sale, so it's affordable both in time and money. With Hellblade, Ninja Theory does an admirable job in making the player think about psychosis and how it might impact those who live with the condition. Ninja Theory's YouTube channel has 30 development diaries which include videos on working with mental health professionals and those who suffer from psychosis to make the experience as accurate as possible. However, just to be clear, playing Hellblade in no way makes me an expert or even especially knowledgeable on the subject. For that reason, I'm going to try and stay away from discussing anything too specific about the condition outside of how it plays out in the story. If you do want discussion of the mental illness side of Hellblade, then I highly recommend you watch the video that Leonardo da Vinci did on the game. I'll link to it in the description and hopefully on screen now if I remember. It's an excellent video from someone much more qualified to talk about the topic than I am. His videos are always excellent, so you should subscribe to the channel while you're there. This video is going to be split between story discussion and gameplay analysis. I know not everyone likes straight up story commentary, so fair warning, that's what you're going to get for about 8 minutes. I happen to think the story is interesting enough that it's worth recounting, plus I didn't entirely understand the story after one playthrough, so it's possible some of you didn't either. This obviously means there will be full spoilers, and those spoilers will start shortly, so close the video now if you want to play the game. If you want to skip the straight up story commentary, then you can skip to the time on screen now where I start digging a little deeper into the lore stones and other more subtle parts of the story. Finally, if you want to skip all story related discussion, then skip to the time that's on screen now to go straight to gameplay. There's a spoiler-free written review of Hellblade on my website, once again linked to in the description. I ended up giving the game 4 stars out of 5. It wasn't quite a 5-star game for me, but it is a special one nonetheless. There was a little too much downtime and moments I found a touch boring. Many people will argue that the tedious moments are essential to the story Ninja Theory is trying to tell, and I don't dispute that. People defending the combat and puzzle solving aren't wrong by any stretch, I just don't happen to agree in this instance. While I didn't love a lot of the gameplay, I did love the story and Senua as a character, so let's dig into that. Much of Hellblade's story, and certainly the most interesting parts, take place before the events of the game. The backstory is revealed through flashbacks and lore stones that are scattered throughout the world. Senua also has conversations with people who aren't there. In fact, there's a lot going on in Senua's head, so let's clear that up quickly. Senua suffers from psychosis. The most obvious way this manifests is through 4 voices known as the Furies that talk to Senua throughout her journey. If you're wearing headphones when you play, and you really should be, you'll hear the Furies as if they are all around you. It can be pretty intense at times. The Furies sometimes help you out, such as stating you're going the wrong way, although they tend to feed more into your self-doubt and insecurity, becoming more something you should try to ignore than seek guidance from. In addition to the Furies, Senua hears from a man called Druth. He guides her on her journey and is the voice you'll hear reading out the lore stones. There's also the Shadow, who pops up regularly to tell Senua that her quest is hopeless and that she should give up. So what is her quest? The short answer is that she's seeking redemption for the soul of her lover Dillion by taking Dillion's head to Helheim to visit the Norse god Hela. The longer answer requires a trip back to her childhood. For the sake of simplicity, I'm going to talk through the story in chronological order, not the order we uncover it in the game. Senua is a Pict warrior from Orkney, an island off the north coast of Scotland. The Pict warriors were a fierce bunch, and the women would fight alongside the men. The Pict were so feared that the Romans built Hadrian's Wall in what is now the north of England to keep them from moving further south into Roman territory. We're never officially given a year that Hellblade takes place in, however, given the story's focus on Vikings invading Orkney, it's presumably set around the late 8th or early 9th century. From a young age, Senua suffered from what we now call psychosis. Essentially, she saw and heard things that weren't there, including the Furies who lived in her head. I'm sure it's more complicated than that, but that's the way it manifests in the game. Her mother, Galena, also suffered from psychosis. Galena tried to reassure Senua that the voices were a gift from the gods, not a curse. Her father, Zimbel, didn't agree. Zimbel abused both his wife and Senua, believing they were consumed with darkness which would bring trouble to the town. When Senua was still a child, Zimbel convinced the townsfolk that his wife was a witch and they burned her alive. Senua witnessed her mother's death, but promptly repressed the memory and believed her father's lie that Galena killed herself to escape her curse. Senua spent most of her childhood locked up in a small room, although she was occasionally allowed out to complete chores. Her father physically and emotionally abused her, and she continued to be haunted by the voices competing for attention in her head. On one of the rare occasions she was allowed out of the house, Senua wandered into the woods and saw a young man training with a sword by a large tree. She watched him train and returned to do so at every possible opportunity, memorizing his movements and practicing in her own time. One day the man spotted Senua observing and introduced himself as Dillion. Dillion was impressed at how much Senua had learned just by watching him, so he offered to teach her. They practiced regularly and eventually fell in love. A plague hit Senua's town, killing many of the townsfolk, including Dillion's father. Zimbel blamed Senua, saying that the plague was evidence of her curse. Senua started to think her father might be right and thought Dillion also blamed her, although that wasn't the case. Dillion was incredibly supportive, but Senua decided to leave the town anyway, hoping to get rid of the darkness that haunted her. While in the forest, she met a man named Druth. Druth used to be a captive of the Northmen, but he escaped, albeit with serious injuries. He told Senua everything he learned about the Northmen and their religious beliefs and rituals. As you might have guessed, the Northmen are basically Vikings. Druth eventually died from his injuries. There's one more piece to Druth's story, but I'll save that for later. After Druth's death, Senua returned to her village only to find it decimated by the Northmen. Some of the villagers were captured and taken as slaves, however many were murdered outright, including Dillion. Senua found Dillion's body hung up as part of the gruesome Blood Eagle ritual that Vikings were rumoured to have used around this time. Whether they did or not is debatable, but it's horrifying to think about. The victim's ribs were broken and the lungs were pulled out of the chest and spread out to represent wings. Senua knew about the Northmen's beliefs and rituals due to her conversations with Druth. One of those beliefs is that the Blood Eagle execution meant Dillion's soul cannot find rest. She must head to Helheim, Hall of the Dead, and bargain with Hela, daughter of Loki and lord of the underworld, to ensure Dillion's soul can move on. This is where Hellblade Senua's sacrifice begins. It's not clear exactly how much of what happens from here on out is real and what is just in Senua's head. It's certainly not all real. At the very least, the enemies she encounters are imaginary and some of the locations clearly are as well. However, whether she actually travels across the sea on a raft to reach what she believes is Helheim is debatable. The version I'm going with is that she sets sail from Orkney on a raft, taking Dillion's head with her, and reaches an island that she believes is her destination just outside Helheim. Her mind does the rest. Helheim is guarded by two creatures, Surt and Valraven. Each has its own thematic level that must be completed before a boss fight against the beasts themselves. Surt is a fire beast, so naturally his level involves lighting a couple of sacrificial fires and then escaping before Senua succumbs to the flames. Valraven is the god of illusion. He's actually a Danish legend, not a Norse one. I doubt this was an oversight. Ninja Theory probably just wanted to include an illusion theme in the levels, and the god of illusion was the best fit. It's hardly a stretch to imagine that Druth might have picked up on some other legends which he then passed on to Senua. The illusion levels have Senua using portals to make parts of the environment appear and disappear. I'll discuss these mechanics later in the gameplay section. After defeating Surt and Valraven, Senua makes it to the gates of Helheim. However, before she can enter, Hela appears and forces Senua off the bridge, breaking her sword in the process. This middle act is where the story drags on a little too slowly for my liking. Senua finds a sword stuck in a tree. In the myth, the sword, named Grimar, was thrust into the tree by Odin. Whoever could free the sword could keep it. A man named Sigmund ended up as the chosen one and released the sword, however he was captured and ended up in a fight against Odin. Odin's spear broke the sword and Sigmund accepted his fate. Sigmund's final wish was for his son to rebuild Grimar out of the remaining pieces. Senua can't free Grimar until she's completed 4 trials. These sections are all puzzle focused because without the sword Senua can't fight. You can do the trials in any order and they don't add a great deal to the story. The Labyrinth trial is a maze that has you stumbling into rooms you've already visited if you don't pay close attention to the map on the floor in the shape of a tree. The presentation of the map is pretty good. There's a clear starting point and end goal, so you just have to memorise whether you need to take the right or left exit from each room. It's obvious enough that most people will figure it out, but still obtuse enough that you feel vaguely accomplished for following the hint. My only minor complaint is that the map isn't at the starting point. You have to backtrack one room and start again. It feels like this should have been at the entrance and there's nothing to indicate that it's not. Still, going the wrong way leads you to one of the lore stones you need to collect, so no real harm done. The tower trial has probably the most satisfying puzzles in the game. You have to look through large faces to change the world around you and access new areas. The swamp trial has similar illusion mechanics and ends with a fiery beast chasing after you. Finally, the blindness trial takes place in almost complete darkness as you try to avoid beasts lurking in the shadows. I've gone through the trials pretty quickly, but they make up a substantial part of the game. Once the trials are complete, Senua grabs Grimar from the tree and is ready to enter Helheim. Before she can do this, she has to work her way through the sea of corpses and a couple of relatively tough combat encounters. Once in Helheim, Senua must overcome the shadow that's been whispering doubts in her ears the entire way through. Senua initially believes the shadow is the curse that's part of her illness, however it's actually a representation of her father. After defeating the shadow and facing off against a beast called Fenrir, Senua can enter Hela's sanctum. There's another puzzle that requires piecing together a bridge by standing in the right position and focusing to make sure all the pieces are properly aligned. And then Senua finally confronts Hela. Kind of. We see Hela but never get to fight her. Instead, Senua fights waves of enemies, including the bosses we fought previously, and eventually Senua falls in combat. You can't win the final fight, although you can keep going for some time. Senua begs Hela to save Dilian's soul, but Hela refuses. Senua remembers Dilian talking about accepting loss. We see Hela toss Dilian's head over the edge, although it's then revealed that this is Senua as she accepts Dilian's death and the presence of the Furies inside her head. The ending is perhaps a touch predictable. Dilian was never going to come back to life, nor was that Senua's plan. It also never seemed likely that the game would end with Hela granting Dilian peace. That left Senua's acceptance of Dilian's death as the most probable outcome, although given the use of the word sacrifice in the title, I did wonder if it might have a darker ending. I enjoyed unravelling the story, and Ninja Theory did an excellent job of rewarding players who dug into the lore stones a little more, while ensuring the plot still made sense in its own right. Digging into the information contained in the lore stones helps flesh out Senua's journey a little further. There are 44 lore stones in Hellblade. None of them are really hidden as such, although you'll occasionally need to look around a corner to spot them. I missed 5 on my first playthrough, however they carry over so you don't need to collect them all in one run. Each lore stone provides a little snippet of story from Druth. The stories are split into chapters, so if you collect all the lore stones in a given chapter, then you'll get the complete story for that chapter. The stories generally tie into the theme of the chapter, but in some the link is more apparent than others. For example, the story of the sword Grimar was told in the chapter in which you find it. However, the last chapter has a generic story about Ragnarok, which doesn't really fit except that Ragnarok is thematically linked to endings. For the most part, Senua is remembering the stories as Druth told them. However, at the start she imagines him speaking to her in a way which can't be a direct memory because he specifically tells her about the journey she needs to take to save Dilian's soul, which he couldn't have known at the time. For me, the most interesting part of all this is that Senua wouldn't have gone on this journey at all, nor endured most of the hardship, had Druth not told her the Northmen myths in the first place. Senua had to fight Surt and Valraven to reach Helheim because Druth told her that they guarded it. She had to endure trials to get Grimar because Druth told her about the mystical sword that would help her defeat Hela. Even Hela is part of the myth that Senua wouldn't have known about if it were not for Druth. If she'd never met him, she might not have believed Dilian's soul needed saving at all and wouldn't have gone on the journey. Of course, given Senua's illness combined with years of abuse at the hands of her father, there's a good chance her mind would have snapped upon seeing Dilian's body and come up with another way to torture her. While on the topic of Druth, there's a little more to him than he initially lets on. If you collect all the lore stones, there's a secret cutscene right before the confrontation with Hela. Here you learn that Druth used to go by the name Findan. He was captured by the Northmen and kept alive because he could speak lots of languages, including their own. Findan hoped to broker a peace between the Pict and the Northmen, but instead he caved under torture and told the Northmen where they could find treasure and more slaves. While with the Northmen, Druth saw a man in black come to the Northmen and make a bargain for free passage. The man in black is almost certainly Senua's father. We don't know exactly what Zynbel told the Northmen, however I suspect he gave them information that led to the Pict village, which in turn led to Dilian's slaughter. We don't know what happened to Zynbel, but I wouldn't be at all surprised if he was with the Northmen in some fashion. This extra scene is a fitting reward for finding all the lore stones. It's not too much that you miss out on a huge part of the story if you don't get it, but it's a tiny little snippet of information you wouldn't otherwise have, which makes you hate Senua's father even more, and perhaps feel more conflicted about Druth, or just sorry for him. The lore stones have one final secret left. There's a message if you translate them. I have no way of verifying any of this, however there are multiple Reddit threads and blog posts that translate the runes in the same way, together with discussion and correction of errors, so I see no reason to doubt it. The lore stones read, "Seek Hela's truth, in mirror, gods betray us, unmask fear." It seems reasonable to split this into 3 parts. Seek Hela's truth in mirror, gods betray us, unmask fear. I'm not sure how much to read into this. Unmask fear could just be a general term for overcoming your fears and doubts. It also might tie into the level where Senua uses masks to create changes to the environment. Gods betray us seems to run counter to one of Hellblade's important messages, which is that it's not gods who cause the suffering, but those closest to us. Seek Hela's truth in mirror seems a little more clear-cut. Senua carries a mirror with her the entire game. She uses this to focus, which slows down time in combat. She also looks through a large mirror right at the end to uncover Hela. And of course a mirror shows your own reflection, which is likely a reference to Hela and Senua being one and the same at the end. Runes are a recurring theme in the game as well as being linked to the lore stones. Senua also has to find runes in the environment to unlock doors. I desperately wanted to find some concrete reason for why Senua's mind concocted these runes. It's obvious why her mind created Northmen as the enemies to defeat, but the runes seem so random by comparison. I've come up with 3 theories and I'm not entirely happy with any of them. The first would be the most uninteresting answer. In one of the lore stones near the end of the game, Druth tells Senua that, like Sigurd, she must learn the secrets of the runes to defeat the gods in Hell. This seems straightforward enough, I guess. However, in this myth, the runes are described as taking various forms, such as victory runes, ship runes, persuasion runes, healing runes, perception runes, etc. In the game, Senua just finds runes to open doors. They certainly don't give her any special powers, although I could be trying to read it too literally. One of the first stories Druth tells us via the lore stones is that of Odin, the all-father and foremost of the gods. Odin craved knowledge of the runes, however he knew that knowledge required sacrifice. Odin hung himself from the world tree and stabbed himself with a spear. He stayed there for days without food or water until at last the runes revealed themselves to him. Given the Senua's sacrifice part of the game's title, I'm inclined to think that Senua's mind concocted the runes to remind her that she won't get anywhere without sacrifice. Odin's physical pain was perhaps a little more obvious, however Senua is clearly still putting herself through an ordeal in her bid to reach Helheim. She has to suffer for the runes to appear. Of course, that doesn't entirely fit with the way these puzzles are placed in the game. When you're looking for runes, the area is nearly always devoid of enemies and you're in no immediate danger. It's relaxing. I imagine hanging from a tree and stabbing yourself with a spear is not comparable. It's likely somewhere upwards of 6.5 on the discomfort scale. My final theory is probably the weakest, but it's also the one I hope is correct. Late in the game we get a brief glimpse of Senua in a small room. I'm pretty sure this is a flashback to the times her father locked her up. The walls have runes on them, so perhaps Senua associates these runes with being trapped behind a locked door and finding the right combination is her way out. Told you it was a stretch. If you have another theory or you can support or counter my theories, then please do let me know in the comments. I have a few more minor points on the story and characters, but they're tied in closely with gameplay mechanics and are better discussed as part of that section. So without further ado, gameplay in Hellblade is easily split into 2 separate sections, combat and puzzles. There's a tiny bit of exploration required to find all the lore stones, however it's so minimal that it's barely worth mentioning. You'll likely fully explore each area in the process of solving the puzzles, and for the most part Hellblade is fairly linear. Let's start with a quick overview of the combat. Senua can do a light attack, heavy attack and a melee attack. She also has a block and a dodge. Successful attacks build up Senua's focus gauge, which is represented by a blue light on her mirror. You can use this whenever you like to slow down time, which is obviously useful for getting out of tight spots. If you time a block just right, you'll do a successful parry, which gives you an opening for an attack that deals extra damage in addition to providing additional focus. There isn't much in the way of enemy variety. Although they come in various sizes, with the larger enemies dealing more damage and taking more hits to go down, there's only one standard enemy that encourages the use of tactics beyond timing blocks and counters. The enemy with the shield is unsurprisingly good at blocking attacks. You can knock his shield out of the way with a quick melee attack and then get in a couple of hits before he regains his composure. Or you can just use your focus ability to get behind him, which is what I tended to do. Everything is present and correct as you'd expect. Hellblade also has a trick up its sleeve. The Furies that continually whisper in Senua's head, and yours if you're playing with headphones, will alert you to an enemy that's about to attack you from behind. You don't have to turn around, just hit the block button and Senua will block the incoming attack, probably with near perfect timing. The combat looks damn good in motion. Pulling off a perfect dodge gives a lovely blue flash as time slows down briefly. If you attack while running, you'll do a leaping thrust into the enemy's belly. It's not difficult to get into a rhythm of blocking one attack, countering to kill the enemy, running to another enemy, stabbing them in the chest, blocking another attack in response to a shout from one of the Furies, going into focus mode and then finishing them all off. It looks impressive, but it never feels particularly fun. The major problem is Senua's speed of movement, and it's a problem that pervades the entire game. Senua is slow. Her running speed is more akin to a quick walk for most characters, and her actual walk is unbearable. Whenever you're not in combat, you'll be holding down the run button. In my case, I kept pressing it harder, subconsciously hoping Senua would move a bit faster. It's possible that the slow speed was a conscious decision to add to Hellblade's atmosphere, however I suspect it was more to do with achieving a stable frame rate. I encountered a few frame rate drops in larger areas, although given the nature of the game it wasn't a huge deal. It just added to the feeling that Senua was always walking through a thick sludge, desperate for the day when she would finally get the chance to stretch her legs. I've noticed this problem a lot in games from smaller studios who are clearly capable of creating incredibly detailed environments, but struggle to get the game running smoothly and force the player to walk slowly lest the frame rate take a dive. The camera is also really close to Senua. According to Ninja Theory's developer diaries, this was necessary due to the smaller team size. A free roaming camera, or a camera that follows a particular path as the protagonist moves through the world, requires a hell of a lot of coding time that Ninja Theory didn't have. An over-the-shoulder camera is much easier to program and avoids the problem of it getting stuck on scenery. I understand why the camera is this close, but I don't particularly like it. The slow movement makes combat far too easy, because in any one-on-one fight you can easily block attacks and get a couple of counters in. In fact, it's so slow that when I did get a beating, it was typically because I dodged or blocked far too early. Hellblade only gets reasonably challenging when multiple enemies come into play, and that's when the close camera is a problem. You only need 2 or 3 enemies around you to completely clog up the screen. The combat arenas are small and you often end up against walls and completely unable to see what's going on. The fight still won't be necessarily all that tough, and you can always use the focus ability to get out of danger. It just isn't much fun. I typically button mashed my way out until I could see some of the environment again. Hellblade was initially going to have directional combat, with the player able to choose which direction Senua are attacked from. However, this was tough to program for, with lots of animations required, and it was considered too hard when multiple enemies were on screen. What I found particularly frustrating is that Ninja Theory seems really close to a more entertaining alternative. It's even kind of in the game already, Ninja Theory just didn't fully embrace it. I can't quite believe I'm saying this, but the solution is more quick time events. My favourite part of Hellblade's combat is already effectively a QTE, it's just that instead of responding to a visual button prompt, you respond to an audio one. When you're in combat, if an enemy comes up behind you and is about to attack, one of the Furies will typically whisper in your ear and say, "behind you." If you react quickly and press the block button, then Senua will turn around and pull off a perfect block. Once again, this isn't challenging, and yet it feels incredibly satisfying. I wish the concept had been taken further. Due to the close camera, you often can't see enemies when they're either side of you, or if you can see them, you can't see exactly when they're going to attack. There are some subtle audio cues, but in the heat of battle it can be tough to pick them out. It would be great if the Furies in Senua's head had also warned me of attacks coming from other directions. If Ninja Theory wanted to go all out, it could have required Senua to respond to these voices throughout combat encounters. Instead of just pressing the block button, you could be required to tap left, right or down to spin Senua around first and then get the block in. The combat wouldn't need to be entirely QTE based, of course. You could still have the same combat when fighting enemies. Using the Furies to help Senua would not only fit thematically with the story, but would also help with Hellblade's otherwise problematic camera while spicing up the combat a touch. If Ninja Theory wanted to go all out, it could even have one of the Furies trying to mess with Senua by tricking her about the enemy placement. For example, what if one of the Furies regularly misled Senua by saying, for example, "on your left," but whispering it in your right ear? You'd have to act quickly, so you might panic and go to the right because that's where the sound came from. A few added features like that would have been enough to keep combat interesting for the entire playthrough. As it is, I quickly got bored. A change like this would pretty much necessitate the use of headphones or a decent surround system, but I'd argue that's almost essential to the experience anyway. In my videos I quite often suggest changes I'd like to see in games, and people criticise this as a case of reviewing the game I want to play and not the one I'm actually playing. It's a fair criticism and one I often struggle to find the right balance on. I'm not anywhere near arrogant or naive enough to believe that developers are even aware of who I am, let alone watching my videos and taking notes. The goal of offering up these suggestions is to develop the criticism a little more. Instead of just saying I don't like the combat because it's too slow, I want to offer up small ways in which it could be improved to better illustrate what I mean. Hopefully with these comments I'm keeping within the spirit of the game and the budget of a developer like Ninja Theory, while also making it clear what I think Hellblade could have done better. I don't just want the combat to be like Bloodborne. I mean I do, but that's not realistic. I just think Ninja Theory missed a couple of opportunities here. And unfortunately I feel much the same way about the puzzles. They start off showing promise, but by the time you've made it a third of the way through the game, you'll have seen all they have to offer. Progression through the levels is often blocked by a locked door. To open the door, Senua has to find a rune in the environment that matches the one on the door. Some doors have up to 3 runes, in which case you need to find them all. The runes aren't typical collectibles. You won't have to explore every nook and cranny of the level, instead you just need to look around and take in the environment. It could be a satisfying puzzle system. Early on you find yourself staring at 2 separate trees and wondering whether Senua could stand in just the right place so they make the shape you're after. Or maybe there's a shadow on the ground that looks a bit like a rune if you could just get to high ground and look at it from a different angle. Some complexity is added over the next couple of hours, but not a lot. In addition to looking for runes in the environment, you also have to stand in the right place to create staircases and paths to new areas, or look through portals to change the world around you. For example, in this section you have to look through this portal so that a gap in the wall appears, then go through the wall to unlock the door, then return to the previous portal and turn things back the way they were. Using the now open door you can return to this area and access the path to where you need to be. One level takes us a step further by changing the entire world around you when you look through the portals. This was probably the highlight of Hellblade's puzzle system, but I would have loved to see it taken further. I suspect one of the reasons it wasn't is once again due to Senua's slow running speed. While I like the style of these puzzles, the need to run back and forth between portals quickly gets tedious. If Senua moved a bit quicker, then running around to figure out puzzles wouldn't be a problem. As it stands, if you make one or two mistakes or get briefly confused and have to backtrack a bit, you're going to be doing that thing where you squeeze the run button as tightly as possible in the vain hope that it will unlock Senua's hidden sprint mode. The puzzles are also a touch easy, and there are a few too many hints for my liking. When you're looking for runes and you get near the correct location, the rune in question will appear highlighted on the screen to tell you that you're in the right place. It's then just a case of spinning around until you see the correct shape. Hellblade's early game testers regularly got lost, however the environments were changed to make the desired path a bit clearer. That should have been enough, but instead Ninja Theory might have played it a little too safe with the difficulty. One late game puzzle heads in the right direction but still stops before it really challenges the player. Senua has to avoid the darkness. She can carry a torch, however to get where she needs to be she must walk through a waterfall, which of course extinguishes the torch. Most people will likely get caught once figuring this out. You need to go to another area first and light a torch to provide a safe zone. Senua can then run to the light, knock down a bridge and create a clear path. Another late game puzzle has you fixing a bridge by standing in the correct spot to align its separate parts until you can walk across. At one point you walk onto the still incomplete bridge and look back towards where you were standing before to create a new area you can then head to complete the bridge. I enjoyed these two puzzles, but they're about as taxing as the game got. Even a couple of Uncharted-esque puzzles where you have to pull levers and move objects around would have provided a welcome bit of challenge. I'm not convinced the hints that appeared on screen were necessary. Most of the puzzle areas are small and there's only so much space for you to move around. I suspect the main reason for these is to prevent people focusing on the wrong shape, which may otherwise look correct. I did this once myself. Getting frustrated probably doesn't enhance the experience, and so Ninja Theory added in the hints to ensure everyone had a smooth playthrough. The option to turn the hints off would have been appreciated though. Finally, I have to wonder whether the Furies could have been incorporated into puzzles a little more, ideally as a replacement for the hint system. They occasionally chip in to tell Senua that she's going the wrong way, and they constantly doubt her ability to succeed. But I'd have loved it if they'd messed with her a bit more. As with my suggestion for the combat, the Furies could offer tips of where to go, but one of the Furies could lie and try to lead Senua astray. This feels much more fitting with Senua's journey than lots of bright runes appearing in her vision when she happens to be close to the right spot. It's quite possible that everything I've listed as a problem with combat and the puzzles was intentional. Ninja Theory didn't want people to struggle with puzzles, Senua is supposed to be slow to move around, and the combat is supposed to be a bit of a slog. That could all have been done to better get across the atmosphere that Ninja Theory was going for. There's nothing wrong with that, of course, but for me it slightly took the edge off the experience. It's what stops Hellblade from being a 5-star game in my eyes. It won't bother everyone, and some people will see it as absolutely crucial to the experience. There's plenty in Hellblade that even a contrarian nitpicker like myself can enjoy. Hellblade won awards for its sound design, and they were well deserved. I knew before I started playing that Senua had voices in her head, but I had no idea they'd be so effective. Even during normal sections they taunt Senua, filling her mind with doubts and encouraging her to go back. With a decent set of headphones, these voices will fill your mind in much the same way, inflicting you with all those same doubts. Ninja Theory used binaural recording to capture the voices of the Furies, and its efforts paid off. One moment was especially effective. During one of the trials, Senua is almost blind. She can just about make out some light and is aware that there are monsters nearby. As she sneaks through, one of the Furies whispers in your left ear.
I know what you're thinking. He's not really here. It seems there's no escaping the past in this place. And so she's forced to relive it. What end?
It's so subtle that I was sure I could actually feel the breath on the back of my neck, and I shivered a couple of times even when on my second playthrough. Special mention should also go to the HUD, or lack thereof. There's nothing on screen. Enemy health is displayed by the number of cuts they have on their bodies, while Senua's health is visualised through filters that make the screen darker and blurrier as she takes damage. Senua's focus gauge is displayed on the mirror she carries around that is visible at all times. Hellblade often looks gorgeous and borderline photorealistic. The lack of a HUD lets you fully appreciate that without having to constantly go into a photo mode. Upon its release, Hellblade got a lot of negative attention due to its permadeath system. Early on in the game you end up in a fight you cannot win. Senua is killed before coming back to life with a black rot spreading up her arm. You're told that the black rot will continue to spread with each death. If the rot reaches Senua's head, then she will die permanently. Your save file will be wiped and you'll be forced to start the game from the beginning. There are two issues to this. First, was it a good idea to include this permadeath message considering it isn't actually true? Second, would permadeath be a good addition anyway? Hellblade doesn't have permadeath, or at least if it does you must have to die so often that no one will ever discover it. I tested it myself but got bored around the 20th death. I've seen reports online of people dying over 50 times and not triggering it. I can't find any video evidence of it actually happening. This generated a lot of confusion around release, and while to a certain extent all publicity is good publicity, I have to wonder how many sales were lost due to people put off by the idea of permadeath. Overall, the decision to include the lie about permadeath doesn't seem to have been worth the risk. Hellblade sold well, however it was a digital only release and most purchases are those already attuned to the video game industry. They would have found out about the misleading permadeath before playing, and therefore the only people who experienced Hellblade with the permadeath in mind were journalists who got early review copies. It all ended up being a big fuss about nothing and was probably a steep learning experience for Ninja Theory, publishing their first game as an independent studio. A permadeath mechanic adds tension, potentially quite a lot depending on how far into the game you are and how close you are to losing your save. There are reviews of Hellblade that comment on the added tension they felt knowing they could lose it all at any minute. The tension would make you worry about every combat encounter and stop you treating them like a chore. That sounds good. When you finish Hellblade under those circumstances, you'll no doubt breathe a sigh of relief and probably feel like you've truly overcome something, much like Senua. So what's the problem with permadeath? Well, while it's great for those who overcome the tension and win, it's a big punishment for those who don't. Lots of things in life are tense. I imagine tightrope walking between two buildings is tense, but there's a reason you won't catch me doing it. I'm terrified of heights for one thing. But also because the punishment is too great. Some people likely crave the tension and relief they get from making it to the other side, however those who fail are in a spot of bother. Despite Hellblade's frequent combat encounters, it's generally something people play for the experience, not the gameplay. I found a second playthrough rewarding because it helped clear up the story, however the experience of playing it again was a slog. So no, Hellblade should not have a permadeath mechanic. It's not worth the frustration it would impart on those who fail. Ninja Theory's tiny budget also rears its head in some of the cutscenes as well. As you already know, the actor playing Senua, Melina Jurgens, started off with Ninja Theory as a video editor and was only filling in until a professional actor was hired. She ended up getting the job and deservedly won an award at TGA 2017 for her performance. Unfortunately, Jurgens was the only character whose performance was motion captured. Characters like Druth, Galena and Dillian pop up in full motion video, which looks jarring alongside Senua. Dillian's character is especially weird because he has a trendy and well-kempt beard, which I'm fairly sure was beyond the capabilities of whatever the 9th century version of Gillette might have been. It's also hard not to notice the restricted space that Ninja Theory worked with for its motion capture. Every big moment is accompanied by the camera panning around Senua as she stares into space. This could have been an artistic decision, however I'm sure Ninja Theory would have done a little more with Senua if it had more space to work with. These are obviously minor niggles, but I've never talked about a game without nitpicking, and I'm not about to start now. Really, these complaints do more to emphasise what a phenomenal job Ninja Theory did with a limited budget. The team was between 12 and 15 people. One guy designed the environment, one woman designed most of the enemies. Epic Games chipped in to help with the engine and other contractors were used to help with motion capture, however everyone at Ninja Theory had to fire on all cylinders for Hellblade to be this good. The development diaries are a fascinating watch and I highly recommend checking them out. There are 30 in total, around 5 to 6 minutes each. In addition to showing behind the scenes footage of motion capture, environment design and storytelling, you'll also see the ways the team was able to save money by turning a meeting room into a motion capture studio, with wardrobe poles from IKEA and £20 lighting equipment from Amazon. Ninja Theory has shown it can save money with a bit of creative thinking, however I hope it gets a much bigger budget for its next project because it's earned it. Mind you, I remember thinking much the same thing after playing Enslaved: Odyssey to the West, and Ninja Theory's next game ended up being Devil May Cry. Make of that what you will. Large parts of Hellblade are excellent. Its atmosphere, story and sound design are all top quality. There are moments when gameplay and story intersect perfectly, such as the chapter when Senua is trying to escape the shadow haunting her mind by literally staying out of the shadows. The rest of the time, however, the gameplay is just kind of bland due to Senua's slow pace of movement and combat. If you think of Hellblade as an experience akin to a cross between a walking simulator and an action game, then you should have a good idea what to expect. If you have higher expectations, then you're likely to be disappointed. Everything I've complained about could be argued as an important part of Hellblade's experience that shouldn't be changed. You may well end up being one of the people who disagree with my complaints, so I highly encourage you to give it a try if you can. And that's it. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please consider hitting the like button and subscribing if you want to see what I'm doing next. Please let me know in the comments if you can clarify any parts of the story that I got wrong or was uncertain about. My next video should be on Fallout 2 for the next part in my isometric CRPG series. I'm not sure exactly what's coming up after that, but I've got a fair few ideas in the works. I'm not going to say exactly what because I've made that mistake before. In the meantime, I'm still streaming on Twitch. I've been playing a lot of Kingdom Come Deliverance and Akami HD recently, and we'll probably keep going with those for most of March. I should be starting a playthrough of Far Cry 5 when it's released on March 27th. Okay, that's it from me. Cheers.